In a quiet countryside village, where the rice fields stretched endlessly and a small canal meandered like a lifeline feeding the land, lived a man named Hoa. He was in his early 50s, sturdy in build, his skin darkened by the sun, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor. He and his wife shared a small house with a red-tiled roof, a lush vegetable garden in the back, and the canal flowing right in front. For as long as he could remember, Hoa had lived with the sound of running water, bathing in the canal after long days in the fields, watching children laugh and play, floating paper boats downstream. Yet one thing always weighed on his mind: life in the countryside was still lacking in many ways, especially electricity. Although the national power grid had reached the village, electricity was neither cheap nor reliable. Blackouts were frequent during storms, leaving the entire village in darkness. Without power, fans wouldn't turn, radios went silent, and rice left out to dry in the yards risked spoiling in the damp night air. Hoa thought to himself, we live right beside this canal. Water flows day and night, never stopping. Why not try to harness it to generate electricity? The idea had flickered in his mind for years, but it wasn't until he had lived more than half his life that he finally decided to make it real. That afternoon, Hoa stood by the canal, watching the steady current. The autumn sky was clear, white egrets glided low over the fields, and children splashed and played in the water. He remembered glimpses of homemade hydroelectric models he had once read about in newspapers. He wasn't an engineer, he had no advanced machines, but he had skilled hands, patience, and above all, a firm belief: if others can do it, so can I, as long as I'm willing to learn and persist. He began by studying the canal. The section running past his house was about 4 meters wide. The current wasn't too fierce, but strong enough to push floating pieces of wood downstream. With a long stick, he measured the depth, nearly 1.5 meters at its deepest. In his mind, a picture formed: if he could dam part of the canal, create a small reservoir to concentrate the flow, then channel the water through a water wheel, it would surely turn a generator. The thought alone filled him with excitement, like a child discovering a new game. The next day, Hoa went around the village asking questions. At the local mechanic's shop run by Thine, who welded gates and repaired farm vehicles, Hoa asked if there was any kind of shaft sturdy enough to withstand constant water flow. Thine laughed and shook his head. Hoa, that's difficult. Who in the countryside has time for hydroelectric projects? We already have national electricity, why bother? But Hoa wasn't discouraged. He collected every bit of advice he heard. Someone suggested using motorcycle bearings for the shaft, another mentioned old cart wheels for the paddles. Piece by piece, ideas piled up in his mind like bricks forming a wall. That evening, after a simple dinner with his wife, Hoa pulled out an old notebook and began sketching clumsy circles and rectangles. He drew a water wheel with 8 wooden paddles, mounted on a steel shaft, connected to an old generator salvaged from a discarded motorbike. The drawing was crude, but to him it was the blueprint of something grand. His wife glanced over and chuckled softly, still tinkering after all these years. Well, as long as it makes you happy, go ahead. That gentle support strengthened his resolve even more. In the days that followed, he set out to gather materials. At the scrap yard in town, he rummaged through piles of rusted steel, coming home with a few thick iron shafts, a couple of bearings still in working condition, and most importantly, an old generator from a farm tractor. The seller asked, surprised, "What are you going to do with this junk?" Hoa only smiled. "I'm building a mini hydroelectric plant. I want to see if I can light a bulb." People laughed at the notion, but inside him, belief burned brighter. Back at home, he built a small workshop by the canal, a simple wooden shed with a table cluttered with hammers, pliers, saws, and chisels. The smell of freshly cut wood mixed with the tang of rusted iron and greasy bearings, creating the fragrance of labor and invention. Every morning after finishing his field work, Hoa sat there cutting, sawing, hammering, and fitting planks together to shape the water wheel paddles. At first, the pieces didn't fit, the water flow couldn't catch properly, and the wheel failed to turn with strength. He dismantled and rebuilt again and again. Some days, under the scorching sun, sweat drenched his shirt, but he refused to stop. Determination flowed through him like the water in the canal, unceasing. Villagers passing by grew curious. Some shook their heads. "HOA, you're old now. You should rest instead of chasing dreams." Others offered encouragement. "It might work. Who knows? If you succeed, the whole village could benefit." The chatter only fueled him more. He knew this wasn't just for himself, it was to prove that even in poor villages, creativity could thrive. They didn't always have to wait for solutions from the city. After nearly 2 weeks, the first water wheel was ready. It was as large as a millstone, with 8 wooden paddles evenly spaced and fastened to a sturdy shaft. With the help of his son, HOA carried it to the canal, mounting it on the wooden frame he had built. The moment the water struck, the wheel began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. His heart pounded. "It's spinning. It's really spinning," he shouted, eyes wide with joy. But the joy faded quickly. The rotation wasn't strong enough to drive the generator. The wheel spun, but too weakly to create usable electricity. HOA collapsed onto the bank, exhausted, a heavy sigh escaping his chest. Weeks of effort felt wasted in that moment. That night he lay awake, tossing and turning. Outside, crickets sang and the canal whispered like a reminder not to give up. He recalled images from books. Large hydroelectric dams always had sluice gates to focus the water. "That's it," he thought. "I need to channel the water, make it hit harder." The next morning, he set to work again, this time building a makeshift dam. With his son helping, they hauled sandbags and drove bamboo stakes into the bed of the canal. For 3 days they toiled, sweat mingling with mud, until a 10-meter section was blocked, forcing the water to rush through a narrower opening. When the wheel was placed back in position, everything changed. Water roared against the paddles, spinning the wheel furiously, producing a faint whir. HOA's hands trembled as he connected the belt from the wheel to the generator. He tightened the bolts, then ran a wire to a single small bulb. Villagers gathered, holding their breath. The wheel spun faster, the generator rattled, and then, a dim yellow glow flickered inside the bulb. "It's lit! It's lit!" someone shouted. Cheers erupted along the canal. HOA stood frozen, eyes misting with tears. It was a weak light, barely bright enough to read by, but it was the fruit of his labor, his persistence, his dream. The first test had succeeded, but HOA knew this was just the beginning. The light was faint, far from enough to power a household. He would need a larger wheel, more paddles, and a way to store electricity in batteries. Challenges lay ahead, but his spirit was firm. He had proven the idea possible. And in that moment, by the shimmering canal, he believed more strongly than ever that persistence could turn even the smallest stream into power. The days after the first light bulb flickered to life were some of the most exhilarating of HOA's life. He walked with a spring in his step, his eyes gleaming as though he had discovered a hidden treasure. Yet behind the excitement, he carried a sober realization: the project was far from finished. A single dim bulb was a start, but he wanted something sturdier, something that could power his home, maybe even help his neighbors. In the following weeks, the canal bank became a lively workshop. HOA extended his small shed, reinforcing it with bamboo poles and a tin roof, so the tools would stay dry even when rainstorms swept through the countryside. Every morning he tended to his rice field and vegetable patch, and every afternoon he returned to the canal to experiment with his contraption. His first task was to strengthen the water wheel. The 8 paddles, though sturdy, were too narrow. He dismantled them one by one, replacing each with broader planks cut from old jackfruit wood, which was heavy and resilient against water. Sawing and shaping took hours, his arms sore, his palms blistered, but the result was worth it, a wheel with paddles wide enough to catch the full force of the water. When he tested it again, the wheel spun faster, more confidently. The generator hummed louder, and the light bulb shone with a steadier glow. His wife stood beside him, her face glowing in the faint yellow light. "It's brighter now," she whispered. "Maybe we can use it to cook rice one day." HOA chuckled. "Not yet. But we'll get there." Still, he needed a way to store energy. Continuous water flow meant continuous spinning, but at night when they needed light the most, the current sometimes slowed. Batteries were the answer. He remembered seeing discarded car batteries at the mechanic's shop. The next morning, he pedaled his rusty bicycle to town and bargained for 2 old, half-dead batteries. With some cleaning and topping up of electrolyte fluid, he managed to coax them back to life. That evening, he connected the generator to the batteries. When the wheel spun, the batteries charged slowly. Hours later, when he disconnected the system and tried the bulb again, it glowed even though the wheel was still. HOA let out a triumphant laugh. Stored power. We've captured the stream's energy in a box. Word spread quickly. Neighbors began dropping by, curious to see the electric canal. Children watched in awe as HOA flipped a switch and lit a bulb from the water's power. Some adults still doubted. It's only a toy, one man muttered. How will that ever compare to real electricity? Others, however, started to imagine possibilities. What if we could run a fan? Or charge a phone? Encouraged, HOA set himself a new goal, to light up his entire house. He scoured the scrap yard again, hunting for better materials. This time he found a larger generator from a broken rice mill. It was heavy, requiring 2 men to load onto a cart, but its capacity was far greater. Installing it, however, was another story. The belt slipped repeatedly, the shaft bent under strain, and the wheel cracked from the stress of the stronger load. For days, failure followed failure. One rainy afternoon, as he sat staring at the broken wheel, doubt crept in. Mud clung to his feet, water dripped from the shed's roof, and his hands throbbed with soreness. Maybe the villagers were right, he thought. Maybe I'm chasing smoke. Maybe I'm too old for this. But then he remembered the first flicker of light, the cheer from the crowd, his wife's hopeful smile. Giving up now would mean letting that light die. He clenched his fists, stood up, and resolved to try again. This time, he approached the problem differently. Instead of one large wheel, he decided to build 2 smaller wheels side by side, each powering the generator through a system of pulleys. It was an ambitious plan, but one that might distribute the load more evenly. With the help of his son, he cut fresh paddles, reinforced the shafts with steel pipes, and aligned the wheels so they turned in harmony. The first test was nerve-wracking. Water surged into the sluice gate, striking the twin wheels. They spun together, smoother than he dared hope. The pulleys whirred, the generator vibrated, and when he connected the wires to a string of bulbs hung across his shed, one by one they flickered on, 5, 6, 7, glowing steadily against the dusk. HOA's heart nearly burst. Villagers clapped, children danced, and even the skeptics nodded in reluctant admiration. That night, his home was bathed in warm light powered entirely by the canal. His wife prepared a celebratory meal of rice, vegetables, and grilled fish, and they ate under the glow of their own electricity. Yet success brought new challenges. The stronger current and heavier machinery began eroding the makeshift dam. Bamboo stakes loosened, sandbags washed away. One morning, HOA awoke to find half the structure collapsed, water gushing uncontrollably and the wheels idle. The sight nearly broke him. He had to start over, this time with something stronger. He gathered stones from the riverbank, hauled them back with his old wheelbarrow, and laid them carefully, row after row, to form a sturdier foundation. Villagers began helping, some out of curiosity, others out of genuine belief in his vision. Men carried stones, women wove ropes, children ferried bamboo poles. Together they built a dam more solid than before. It wasn't just HOA's project anymore, it was the village's. Weeks turned into months. The system grew more sophisticated. HOA added a control gate to regulate water flow, preventing damage during floods. He rigged a small panel of switches in his shed to distribute power safely. The batteries multiplied, salvaged and revived, now enough to power not only lights but also a fan, a radio, even a small television. The first night the village gathered to watch television powered by their canal was unforgettable. The screen flickered to life, showing a weather forecast. Children gasped, elders leaned closer, and laughter echoed along the water. HOA sat silently at the edge, tears slipping down his cheeks. What had once been a solitary dream had become a communal reality. Of course, the system wasn't flawless. During dry season, the canal ran low, and the power output dropped. During storms, the dam strained under the torrent. Each problem forced HOA back into his shed, sketching, tinkering, improving. He learned to adjust the paddles for efficiency, to reinforce the shafts, to divert excess water safely. He became, without realizing it, both an engineer and a teacher, explaining to neighbors how water turned into power, how persistence turned into progress. One evening, under the golden sunset, his son asked, "Father, why do you work so hard on this? We already have national electricity." HOA looked at the spinning wheels, the humming generator, the glow of bulbs along the back. "Because, my son, this is ours. The city can cut off the grid whenever they want, but this will always flow, as long as the water runs. And more than that, it shows that we, even in a small village, can build something with our own hands." Years later, the hydroelectric setup still stood on the canal, improved and maintained, powering not just HOA's homes but also helping neighbors during outages. It became a symbol of resilience, creativity born from necessity. Visitors from nearby villages came to see it, some to learn, others to marvel. For HOA, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about the quiet satisfaction of proving that a dream, no matter how small or humble, could be turned into reality with enough patience and perseverance.